Today we'll be working in my small little workbook called Proving the Story of Noah's Ark. I have two workbooks on Noah. One is the story of Noah through the scriptures, and the other one is this small little book about proving that each and everything of Noah's Ark is true and accurate as written. And so we have done the first chapter on this Proving the Story of Noah's Ark. And now we're going to be going to the second chapter, which uh, let me bring up here for us. That's actually day 3. So let's go to the second chapter, which is day 2. Day 2, the flood. So we're going to be talking about the flood and proving that the flood could actually have happened. So first, the scriptures that we're going to be talking about concerning the flood. How was God going to flood the earth? The Genesis 7:11. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. The waters increased and lifted up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and greatly increased on the earth, and the ark moved about on the surface of the waters. And the waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills above the whole heaven was covered. The water prevailed 15 cubits upward, and all the mountains were covered. So those are the scriptures we're going to be covering today to show and prove that flood did indeed happen. What were broken up in the great deep, the large sea? All the fountains of the great deep were broken up. What was opened from above to release the water? The windows of heaven were opened. And we believe that there was a vapor layer around the earth that protected everything. And that is the windows of heaven that opened up. The water that was in that vapor layer was rained down on the earth. How long did it rain? 40 days and 40 nights. What did the waters eventually lift up? It lifted up the ark. What specifically was mentioned that was covered by the water? All the high hills above, under the whole heaven was covered. So all the mountains were covered. So that had been quite a rise of water. How high did the waters go? The waters prevailed 15 cubits, and the mountains were completely covered. Okay. So in summary, what two places did the water come from? The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven. Did the ark have a gentle or rocky ride on the waters? Probably rocky, although they would have had to have some kind of stability because the animals and everybody had to survive it. But it wouldn't have been an easy ride, that's for sure. Where did all the water go after the flood? We'll actually talk about that later. Okay. Was the flood local or worldwide? This is a great debate, but when you think about it, there is no answer except one. Let's take a look again at Genesis 7:19 and 20. And the waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed 15 cubits upward, and the mountains were covered. Points against it being just a local flood. If the flood was only local, how could the waters rise to 20 feet, 6 meters above the mountains? Water seeks its own level. It would not rise to cover the local mountains without leaving the rest of the area untouched. And you notice this picture, that is not possible with water. Water seeks its own level. It's always going to level out. It can't stop with an invisible barrier. So this is one of the best reasons why it could not have been a local flood when it was that high. It would have had to have been all over the earth. If the flood was local, then Noah would not have had to build the ark. He could have just traveled beyond the area of the flood. That's another great thing to think about, is he could have out-traveled the flood if that was the case. If the flood was only local, then men outside the flood would have survived. And yet we know no one except the 8 people on the ark survived. And lastly, if the flood was only local, then God would have repeatedly broken his promise never to send a flood again, which he will end the story of the flood with, that he promises he'll never flood the earth again. If one of your friends did not believe that it was a worldwide flood, which argument listed above would be the most convincing? Well, to me, I would say the science, or number one, would be the most convincing because water seeks its own level. It can never stop with an invisible barrier. So that, to me, is the most convincing that it's a worldwide flood and not a local flood. So, does the story of flood exist in other cultures? If there truly was a flood that covered the whole earth, then other cultures would have the story in their legends as well. Can we prove that? Yes. There are over 200 flood legends all over the world, 95% of which have common elements with the story of Noah's Ark. But is this due to missionary stories being told or due to an actual flood? The Miami people live in the isolated western province of Papua New Guinea. When contacted in 1970s by missionaries, it was discovered by Imi folklore included a flood legend similar to the account of Noah's Ark. And so you see on the graph there the distribution of some flood stories. So they basically circle the whole map as far as the story of the flood. What countries can you name that had a flood story? We also have some pictures described below of the various arcs that the cultures' legends would have. We have a Hindu idea, the Hawaiian idea, the China idea, the Mexico idea, and the Babylonian idea. And of course, on the map, we see places all over the world that have the story of Noah's Ark in some form or fashion. And so, why does nearly every culture have a tradition of a global flood? One of the strongest evidences for global flood, which annihilated all people on earth except for Noah and his family, has been the ambiguous presence of flood legends in the folklore of people groups from around the world. And the stories are also similar. Local geography and cultural aspects may be present, but they all seem to be telling the same story. Over the years, and this is John Morris, I have collected more than 200 of these stories, originally reported by various missionaries, anthropologists, and ethnologists. While the differences are not always trivial, the common essence of the story is instructive as compiled below. Is there a favored family? Yes, 88% of the legends have a favored family. Were they forewarned? Yes, 66% of those that exists in these legends. Is a flood due to wickedness of man? 66% has that in their legends. Is catastrophe only a flood? 95% say that in the legends. Was the flood global? Yes, 95%. I believe that. Is survival due to a boat? Yes, 70% believe that. Were animals also saved? 67% believe that. Did animals play any part? 73% believe that. Did survivors land on a mountain, which we will learn later in the story? 57% believe that. Was the geography local? 82% believe that. Were birds sent out? 35% believe that. Was the rainbow mentioned? Only 7% mentioned the rainbow. Did survivors offer a sacrifice? Only 13% mentioned that. And were specifically 8 persons saved, and only 9% put that together. Putting it all together, their story would read something like this. Once there was a worldwide flood sent by God to judge the wickedness of man, but there was one righteous family which was forewarned of the coming flood. They built a boat on which they survived the flood along with the animals. As the flood ended, their boat landed on a high mountain for which they descended and repopulated the whole earth. Of course, the story sounds much like the biblical story of the Great Flood of Noah's day. The most similar accounts are typically from Middle Eastern cultures, but surprisingly similar legends are found in South America and the Pacific Islands and elsewhere. None of these stories contain the beauty, clarity, and believable detail given in the Bible, but each is meaningful to their own culture. So let's continue in this concept. So now, if there was a flood, then we should have physical evidence of a worldwide flood, and we do. If there was a flood that covered all the mountains, then there should be evidence that the mountains were underwater. Evidence 1, fossils of sea creatures high above sea level, like in the mountains of the Grand Canyon or Mount Everest, and also which are also happen to be far away from the present sea. How could seashells get on top of the mountain? Well, the only way that they could be put on the top of the mountain is they were delivered there by waters. They can't crawl there on their own. How high were fossils found in Grand Canyon? High above sea level. Found in the mountains of Grand Canyon, a mile above sea level. And that's where it comes from the picture there. Okay, evidence 2, rapid burial of plants and animals, which would make sense. If there was a flood, a rapid flood, there'd be a rapid burial of plants and animals. If the flood covered the whole earth, then animals could not escape and they'd be buried rapidly, which we often see in a fossil graveyard. And then evidence 3, rapidly deposited sediment matter deposited at the bottom of a liquid, layers spread across vast areas. Sediment is sedimentary rocks. It's all in the rocks. On every continent, there can be found layers of sedimentary rock that nearly span the continent. Sedimentary rock only comes from being underwater. Basically, sedimentary rock is all the silt and everything of the waters depositing down on the ground and then on top of it and on top of it. And that's called sedimentary rock. It would be then solidified into rock form, but it would be at the bottom of a river or lake. And then which one would convince me the most? Of course, we have that picture of the fish inside another fish, and evidence of a quick death there, because he didn't even have a chance to dissolve the fish inside him. Which one is, I think they're all equally important. The shells on top of the highest mountains and the sedimentary rocks are all equally important. I think those two will probably hold weight for me. Probably even the sedimentary rock is even more important since it's all over. It's not just in one place or another. Now, again, if there was a global flood and the flood waters don't exist now, where did the waters go? And the scripture we're going to be talking about here is Genesis 8:3, and the waters recede continually from the earth. If this is true, and we know that water finds its own level, then where was the hole or open space for the water to recede to? We have a hint in Psalm 104:6-8. You clothed the earth with floods of water, water that covered even the mountains. At your command, the water fled. At the sound of your thunder, it hurried away. Mountains rose and valleys sank to the levels you decreed. So it's very possible that we had some earthquakes during that time to help move the water to their various locations. If there was earthquakes, mountains would have rised up, which would make valleys, which means the waters would be pushed in various directions so that we would have land showing up and the waters dividing into the seas. That's the belief that there is. Knowing that water goes to the lowest point, what does the scripture above say happened? It says that mountains rose and valleys sank to the levels you decreed. That way the waters could stay level. The most logical answer is God made room for the water by adjusting the topography of the earth, creating deep valleys and raising up mountains. What is the deepest trench in the ocean? That's the Mariana Trench, which is 35,825 feet deep. Wow, quite deep. One of the highest mountains is shown here. What is it? It's Mount Everest at 29,035 feet high. So using math, what is the difference between the Mariana Trench and Mount Everest? Well, you can work that out, but basically 35, 29, 30, 65, So about 60, it's about 65,000 feet difference, roughly. You probably could figure that one out. So these are some trenches that were made. Were they made at the end of the flood? Who knows? But that would give an answer as to where the waters receded to. Just an interesting picture of the floods. And another interesting picture of the fountains of the deep bursting forth. Okay. Well, that's the it for this chapter. I hope you enjoy it.